All right. Well, welcome to this month's Legacy Project. My name is Chad Reyes, and I am excited to be with you guys today. We're here also one of the founders, Dan Scott, and we're going to be talking today about a great conversation around social capital and a legacy, and how the impact of social capital is on a person's legacy. So just get ready, be prepared for us. We're going to share. We'd love to have you involved. You know, the purpose of this conversation series is to really engage. So we would love for you to type in your questions or to raise your hand, and we'd open up your mic to make it more of a dialogue rather than just Dan and I sharing. But for most of today, we're gonna at least share about around social capital, the impact social capital has on a family's legacy. As advisors, what can we be sharing with the families that we work with to really engage them at that next level in the conversation. So I'm excited to be with you. As many of you know, if you've been on here before, the purpose of the Legacy Project is really the 3 C's. It's conversation, it's community, and it's collaboration. So what we're doing here today is the conversation series. It's a conversation around legacy. We'd love to have you involved in that conversation. So just, you know, you can write in the box, the message box, or you can raise your hand and we'll open up the mics for you to engage in this conversation. So we're going to start right now. Just give me one moment so that we could, hold on one. Okay. Dan, could you could see the screen?
I can see the Legacy Project, 3 circles.
Okay, perfect. All right. Danielle, is it possible for you to, are you able to see me as well? Because I just want to make sure that the audience, are they able to see the webcam, or they're just seeing just the screen?
They are seeing both of you.
Okay, perfect.
And the and the
perfect. All right.
You turn Chad's camera off, it's fine. They just.
So Dan, I'm glad to be with you today, and for those that are listening, I'm really excited to talk about this whole concept of social capital. You and I, you know, we've been at this now for probably 15 years around integrating legacy planning as part of the overall estate planning and how's that work. But you and I have talked about social capital, and we've been talking about it for many years, and the impact of social capital on a legacy. And I'd love for maybe you to paint a picture of your article that you recently posted on your blog around social capital and the impact on a legacy. Maybe you can kind of paint the picture around that, and then we can start having a discussion around some of those points that you bring up.
For sure, and great to be here, Chad. Thank you as always. You know, let's start by talking about what we mean by legacy also, because that, I think, dictates the importance of social capital. You know, legacy, in my view, is not just the purpose or the impact that you leave at the end of your life. It is really the life you live, right? The life you live is legacy you leave. And so in helping people build a life to fulfill their life purpose, to build the legacy that they want, you know, the first component you have to look at in designing a strategy or a plan for that is, well, what do you have to accomplish, right, that purpose? What do you have to achieve your goals? And that comes down to resources or assets. And so that's where we get into the various categories of assets in terms of, you know, traditional financial capital, which essentially is what you own, but that is only really one small part. And as I've described in the article, you know, what you own is one component. More importantly is who you are, and that's really your human capital. Then there is what you create and the impact that you have, and that's what I would call creative capital. And then the other component is who you know, and that's your social capital and your relationships. And so in terms of how to move forward and accomplish purpose, you have to look at how can you deploy these resources and assets. And in my view, creating opportunity, right, which is essential, to achieving your purpose, because at the end of the day, it all comes down to the need that you're fulfilling, and any accomplishment in life stems from the opportunity to accomplish the thing that you've done. And so how do you create opportunity? Well, one, obviously financial assets is a strong one. Financial assets leads to buying a lot of, or paying for a lot of privileges and things in life, whether that's education, whether that's, I talk about social clubs and just access, and, money is a powerful tool when it comes to opportunity. But more important is really the relationships you have. Because at the end of the day, it all does come down to knowing somebody and having somebody give you that opportunity. So the importance of social capital is, in a proactive way, essential, and I think the most valuable when it comes to kind of connecting dots and helping somebody accomplish their goal. How can we leverage these relationships? How can we invest in those relationships and grow those? How can we be strategic in finding new relationships along our path and journey that can help fulfill and accomplish those goals? Then you get to, and I know you've talked about sort of the succession of social capital and being able to maintain those relationships, say within a family or other organizational structure, and to really sort of hand those off to the next generation, which furthers the power sort of that opportunity and the ability to have purpose.
Yeah.
And then just lastly, the last thing that I touch on in the article that I think is sort of understated is when we look at kind of why do we invest, right? What are the goals and things? And we always talk about, we want happy clients. And most people, when if you surveyed a room and you ask what they want out of life, most people will respond with an answer like happiness, or what do I want for my children? Most people will respond with happiness. And what I touch on in the article is, the science and the studies that have been done around happiness really falls under that category of positive psychology, which has adopted, I should say, the term well-being as opposed to happiness, and that really sort of what we're looking to achieve in our life is greater well-being, and that's what we look for our children. And they did this because there's 5 measurable components to well-being, one of which is relationships. Which is social capital. We can get into the other ones another time. But interestingly enough, other studies show that overall, right, there's a famous Harvard study that was done over something like 80 years. And the key #1 factor when it came to health, life longevity, and all these various different positive aspects of life, it was relationships. And so not only, are these are relationships necessary in terms of building a legacy and a life of purpose and things, it actually helps with your health, your wellness, and your well-being.
Yeah.
And that's just, to me, very powerful. And it all comes, when you think about it, it comes back to humans are social creatures, and that's we're bred that way, right? We need each other. So that's a somewhat short overview of social capital as it relates to legacy.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think, to your point, Dan, I think it's so important that when we're working with clients, that we're taking this whole social capital or relationship capital into account. And I just wanted to point out that when I'm working with clients, I think that the key to a happy life is there 3 parts to that. We have 3 C's for the Legacy Project, but it's confidence, competence. So we got the first one, competence, then we got confidence, and then we got character. So happiness, when we got all 3 of those aligning, when we're living a confident life, and I'm not talking about a confident life in the sense of perceived confidence. I'm talking about actual confidence, right? Real confidence. Then we have character that aligns up with good character. Well, all of this stuff brings into a fulfillment. And I think a lot of the times when we're working with families, and I know we have some attorneys on here, we have wealth managers, we have maybe accountants, trust officers, but I think a lot of the times when we're working with clients, we focus so much on the financial assets. And I know that because I used to do that in my own practice back in the day. It was all about, okay, this is what you have, this is what the tax laws are, this is what the estate tax limits are. And I think a big part of it is, and I think what a lot of these families are craving is the need for guidance around these conversations, right? And you know, like you've heard me talk about this all the time. I talk about my niece Crystal and how since 7 years old, I've always brought it into conversations. I put my arm around her. I say, this is my niece. She's amazing. She's a star. And what I start doing is I start transferring a lot of social capital while we're alive. But I've been in meetings where I've had the matriarch and the patriarch, and they've said, if something happens to me, I don't know how this is going to continue because my banker doesn't have a relationship with the next generation, or doesn't have a relationship with my successor. And I think as we're talking about true legacy planning, is we have to be thinking at it through a multi-dimensional approach, right? It's not just this is my assets, because the assets that our clients have created, your clients, our clients, and the people that are on this call, the assets that they've created is not only because of financial assets. It's a lot of opportunities that came from relationships. And if we're not talking about how do we intentionally steward those relationships, how do we intentionally transfer those relationships to the next generation, to our successor, whether they're in the family or out of the family, I think we tremendously reduce the true generational planning that we can do. And there's a I want to share this with some of the people that are on here today. There's a visual that I use that has helped me tremendously. So you take a piece of paper, right? Take like an 8.5 by 11, but picture it's landscape, right? And you take it, you draw from the top left, you draw it straight down to the bottom right, right? And part of transferring social capital is taking that piece of paper and then drawing lines down that paper. So let's say we draw 10 lines down that paper. So what it's doing is it's actually dividing the arrow, the line that's going from point A, from this point to that point. But every year that we go on, we should be transferring some of that social capital to whoever the successors are, right? So by the time we get to year 10 or 11 or 12, we've intentionally transferred it where people didn't necessarily feel it, but they've experienced it. So if I'm not here in 10 years from now, my influence, my social capital, my relationships could have been able to be clearly transferred to my successor. And I think a lot of businesses, a lot of organizations don't do that well. And what happens is that when, let's say, that creative or that entrepreneur passes away, it's like, well, what do we do now? Well, what do we do now is because we didn't have a creative intent, we didn't have an intentional plan leading up to that point. And I just think that advisors, we need to be talking more about that and letting people recognize that it is a process, and the best transitions occur when you don't feel it. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that, Dan.
No, I 100% agree. I mean, when we talk about, yeah, I'm big on process and structure and discipline. And, you know, when we talk about wealth transfer, you know, when we talk about families having conversations around wealth and money, particularly, we don't include the other categories of wealth, which, again, I would argue actually have a greater impact on your life. I know a gentleman down in Atlanta who works with a lot of wealthy families, and, you know, he refers to family capital. I mean, family capital I see as a form of social capital. I mean, it begins with the relationships within the family and the resources, right? Because the impact is exponential. You know, when you have a financial asset, you know, it has sort of a finite, right, value on the market or wherever. When you have social capital, what I find fascinating is it's really the ability to tap into the resources and the capital of another person. And, you know, so it's imagine that that video where it's one person and it kind of exponentially flows from who they know and who they know. And so, you know, every relationship sort of has this almost, you know, limitless, you know, other resources to it through through that individual's own social capital and other resources. Chad, I lost your video. Can you hear me?
Dan, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, so you can hear me, but you can't see me. For some reason, my webcam stopped showing.
I just wanted to make sure I wasn't the one frozen as I'm blabbing on here. So I think, again, it begins around our discussion of what is wealth, because when we talk about wealth transfer or generational wealth, we need to understand what that is beyond financial assets. So having those conversations and setting a structure and a discipline in place to be intentional and purposeful on how we're going to transfer all of those categories of assets is key. Absolutely key. I think we lost you again, Chad. Danny, are you there? Not sure if I'm connected or not.
Dan, could you hear me?
I can hear you. There you go.
Okay, so for some reason, my webcam is not showing, and I'm not sure why. So rather than trying to fix that right now, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen, and we'll just continue the conversation that way, okay?
That was my Jedi mind trick from my earlier comment, Chad.
But yeah, so as it pertains to the social capital, is there any practical steps that you use in your practice that helps you when you're helping a family plan for their legacy that some of these advisors can take away from today's conversation?
Sure. I mean, and again, let me just, preface that a lot of the planning I'm doing today is a lot more focused on building legacy, so that proactive while the client is living, right? So how to help them accomplish goals or, accomplish their purpose in life are the conversations I'm having with the client around relationships. So when I do, a sort of intake with a client, which we'll talk about, obviously financial assets and things, we have a whole conversation and create a list around key relationships. What is their social capital? So we try to really identify who those individuals are, or those institutions are, why they're relevant, etc. And so it becomes connecting dots in terms of when we create a strategy of these are the goals and the steps that you want to take over the next year or so. In terms of deploying assets, you're going to make certain financial investments, but we're going to make certain social investments as well, and try to cultivate those relationships. So, one very practical thing is just really having that list, considering it an asset and treating it as such in terms of putting it on, the spreadsheet, et cetera. So that's a starting point for me. And the same goes true, when it comes to legacy planning in terms of post-life. It's going to begin there too, right? Having an organized database, spreadsheet, whatever it is, of key relationships so that you can see what it is that you're working with.
Yeah, and then so let's just kind of walk through this for a moment. So client that you're working with puts together some of these key relationships, right? So let's say they identify 10 or 12 key relationships that are part of their social capital network, right? From that point, what does it typically look like? Because I'd love some of the practitioners that are on here to be able to see how you practically use that in a day-to-day practice.
So again, in terms of accomplishing goals or a strategy, in terms of steps that need to be taken, right, in terms of investments that need to be made, we're going to identify who that person is and where, if they fit in with what goals we're trying to accomplish. And so it's going to be, in terms of giving finite steps for the client, contacting that person or managing that relationship is what we're going to put out as something they need to do. And we're going to, have accountability in our next meeting when we say, okay, did you talk to Joe and what did he say? And that sort of thing. So that's where it begins, is, having that, again, organized sort of database, and then, having hands-on steps that need to be taken in terms of how to manage that relationship. Is that what you were asking? I'm not sure.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that from when it comes to social capital, there's two parts to the social capital. It's how do you manage your social capital while you're alive,
Mhm.
and then how do you transfer your social capital when you're no longer here? And I think as advisors that serve families, is if we're truly helping them with their legacy, is managing social capital no different than they manage financial capital,
Right.
reviewing it consistently. Yeah, one of the things that I do, Dan, and you may know this, but in my book, I have a vision book that I look at every day for the most part. And in that book, I have the 12 relationships that I'm investing in that year specifically. Who are the 12 people that I want to invest in and really be intentional with? Because to your point, I need to manage my social capital well, because when you manage social capital or when you manage relationships well, what happens is you just have a more fruitful, enjoyable life. And life is relationships. If any of the advisors on here, if you think about your business model and think about, if you're a wealth manager, you probably have some key relationships with some advisors, some accountants, some attorneys, right? Some key influencers in the community that send you business. But how do we manage that well, and then how do we get our clients to manage that well? Because if they manage it well, then they have a much higher level of intentionality around building their legacy. And I think sometimes in the world that we're living in, especially right now with all the stress and chaos that's going on, I think people forget that relationships are so key. It is so key to the success of your organization, to the success of your family, your life. And I think as legacy advisors, we have to help them with that. We have to help them recognize that that is a tremendous asset that they have, that if we use it well, could be tremendous blessing to them, to their business, and to their community.
100%. And I'll just emphasize, the right relationships are what really matter, because I think what ends up for a lot of people, and it's because they don't have focus and they don't have, they're not necessarily living purposefully or intentionally in terms of building a legacy, is that they end up with, somewhat meaningless relationships, right? And it's just, it's not it's not aligned with who they are. And I think one of the things that comes out of once you sort of devote yourself to, this is my life purpose, this is the legacy I'm building, and you build into that legacy, things like, your human, your creative capital, who you are, what your passions are, what your talents are, all these different elements. When you really sort of put that package together, what you're going to find is you start developing the right relationships, because when you're committed, right, to your purpose, you end up finding people that are sort of similarly aligned and share those interests and share those values, and it overall increases your ability to have an impact, and it also increases your well-being in terms of your happiness. These are the people you want to sit around and talk about, because you care about the same things. And so one of the mistakes that we make, I think, as a society, is we kind of keep these facade relationships for all the wrong reasons. A lot of times because of financial assets. How many people do you know have relationships because so-and-so has money, right? And they just think, well, they're an important person or they're an influential person. Well, why? Does their importance or influence have anything to do with what goal or what path you're on? Because if not, what's the point? Right? I mean, I don't need to, what do I need to meet Warren Buffett for if I don't care about really if our lives are just that different? And so we're attracted to people often for the wrong reasons. And so, I think that's an important distinction to make.
Yeah. I've heard John Maxwell, right, which many of you and Dan, has been a friend and mentor to Danielle and I. I heard him share this. His dad had asked him. His dad's no longer with us, but his dad passed away at 98. And when John was younger, his dad would always give him this example. He'd say, "John, there's 5 frogs on a log. 4 decide to jump off. How many are left?" And John would say, "Well, there's 5." He'd say there's 1. He said, no, there's not one, John. There's still five. They decided to, but they didn't actually do it. And I think that happens a lot around some of the planning and the intentionality with people's legacies and relationships. How many relationships do you have? 12. How much are you investing in them? Well, a lot. But did you intentionally invest in them, or are you just making a decision to but never acting on it, right? And I think I see this with families. I mean, this is probably the biggest struggle, at least for me, when I'm working with advisors. I mean, when I'm working with families, successful entrepreneurs. The biggest struggle that I see is the intensity of their calendar. So it's like I can't get to this. I can't do this. I know I need to, but I have all these other things going. And I think one of the jobs of a very good advisor is to help a family prioritize.
1000% agree.
Because I think without being if we're really a good advisor, we're working with the family to help them prioritize on what are the things that are most important. Because if we don't speak into their life and help them with prioritizing, what will happen is that all of the urgent things will take priority over the legacy things. The things that are really most important to the family. Because at the end of the day, I think if anyone's on here, if we were to ask them and I could have a one-on-one heart-to-heart conversation with them and I said to them, what are the most important things? I don't think they would say the business. I don't think they would say all of these things. They would say the relationships, their children, their grandchildren, their relationships that they built over the years. But we live in a world right now that is competing for our time. And our job as advisors, if we're going to help people manage their social capital and their legacy, is to get them to prioritize. Help them recognize that, is this a priority or is this a priority? And if the money's a priority, then that's fine. But let's make sure we're clearly defining it then, that it's more important than your family, it's more important than your health, it's more important than all of those things. And I think when we start clearly creating a priority list for their legacy, well, now we start to get them to realize which one is more important. So when two things are competing for your time, which one is the one that's going to have more of a priority than the other one? And that's my job as an advisor, to help prioritize the importance of things in their life so that we can start making decisions around them.
But, it's a great point. And how can you prioritize if you don't know what your purpose is, what your goal is, what your legacy is going to be, right? And that's where it all starts with defining that. I mean, we use the word purpose. I mean, it's really, to me, about your life purpose. And trying to figure out what that is. What is it that you are uniquely capable of doing in this world that nobody else can? There's something there, and it's intrinsically related to who you are, nature and nurture, right? So your human capital, how you were made, right? Mind, body, spirit, in that sense, how you were made, and what your natural abilities, what your natural talents, what your passions were, all of those things coupled with what you learn and how you turn those things into skill and mastery, and then marry that with your spiritual beliefs, your sort of fundamental principles, all those different elements. That's and then work on all of those to the highest level, right? Like it's applying, knowing that the uniqueness of self is tied to purpose. Well, then, what can you control? The only thing you can control is you, right? And so cultivating that self in all of those facets is your job, while staying attuned to opportunity, which is what you don't control. Opportunity is the way that the world tells you this is where you're needed, right?
Dan, I think of opportunity as alignment. So if I could speak to that for a moment, we utilize something in our other company, our leadership and business coaching company, Lions Pride. We utilize something we call the business model alignment, right? And it's just so funny because as we're talking, I'm thinking about why not have the legacy model alignment, right? But what we talk about is this. in my 20 years of being in business and working with some very successful families, working with some very successful businesses, and then observing other businesses that not necessarily clients of ours, I've observed that there's 5 things that these successful families do really well. And the first is they define purpose. They're very clear with that business. What is the purpose of this business, right? Then they have a vision. What is the vision of this business? Purpose and vision is very different. Purpose is why we exist. The vision is how do we fulfill that, right? So what's the vision? Then what are the values that we live by as an organization, right? What is the giftedness of the owner and that business? And then what is the strategy? But as I'm talking through this, I'm actually I'm happy I'm having this discussion with you, because I'm going to build that now into our wealth and legacy model, where it's the legacy model alignment. It's purpose, vision, values, giftedness, strategy. But what I see often is these families and these advisors start with strategy. And when you start with strategy, you really are starting with something that is not clearly defined yet. So if we start with purpose, like as an example, if we're helping this family with their legacy and this individual with their legacy, well, what is the purpose of all of this wealth? What is the vision for this wealth? What is the values that you are going to live by and make decisions on? And then you'd like to see family members make those decisions. And then giftedness, I teach on this a lot around giftedness, that people think it's the person that opens up the door, but it's never the person. And Dan, you can attest to this. If you think of any of the creatives that you work with, right? Think of like any of this very successful artists that you may have worked with in the past, right? It was never the person, it was always the gift that they did. So if they were a great musician, or they were a great vocalist, right? What would happen is it's that gift that brought them publicity. It's the gift that brought them to the stage and people wanted to hear. So every family member has a giftedness. Every person that's part of this legacy has a giftedness. And I think we live in a world that has too many people focused on their weaknesses and not enough on their strengths and their giftedness. So I think with families, when we're working with them and we're helping them on legacies and building legacies, we got to focus on giftedness. And I have a rule of thumb that I say 70 to 75% of their time should be in their strength or their giftedness. And then after we clarify those 4 areas, then we talk about as the strategy. What is the strategy as an advisor to help this family build their legacy? Are we going to use idiots? Are we going to use grats? Are we going to use family limited partnerships? Are we going to use dynasty trusts? What are we going to use as a vehicle from a strategy standpoint to build out that family's legacy or that individual's legacy? But we start too much with the strategy and we don't start with the purpose and the vision and the values and the giftedness. That's a foregone conclusion rather than that being in the forefront.
1,000%. And when you say strategy too, like, what are they starting with? A strategy for what? Usually it's a strategy to make money. Right? It's or a strategy to preserve money. It's always a strategy around the financial asset.
Yep.
And the reality is that financial assets are not a goal. Financial assets are a tool. So you can't aim to achieve financial assets. You have to aim to use financial assets to achieve purpose, goal, etc. And so you can't have a strategy until you understand what that purpose is, 1,000%. And all that's rooted in what that gift is, which is to say, I mean, I think a lot of when it comes to what is that purpose, it is bringing that individual's gift to the world. 100% agree. And you need to do it in a vacuum. I mean, when we work with, creatives and creativity, we always say, it's funny, to your point, it's the gift, right? We talk about our client is really the creativity of the person. Which is their gift, right? It's what they can uniquely bring to the world, and we have to develop that without thinking about how it's going to make money, right? You have to first develop what that thing is, and then once you have it and it's complete and you understand what the mission, what the purpose, what all those things are, now you can kind of make that bridge from creativity to commerce. How do we actually develop a model that can monetize this, that can generate revenue, that can allow this person to live and sustain their life, by fulfilling this purpose?
Dan, to your point, and regardless of whether you agree with this company or not, but the founder of the company said this, it's true with Kathy, Chick-fil-A, and he said something very interesting many, many years ago. Actually, John had a conversation with his son, Dan, right? And they were trying to get Chick-fil-A to grow bigger and quicker, right? And Truett said this, and this is tremendous wisdom. He said, listen, if we make our product good and we make it really, really good, our customer will design us to get bigger, will require us to get bigger. But I think a lot of the times what happens when we're working with families is they want to get bigger before they get better, right? So our job working with advisors is to help them to get better, help them to create some governance around what they've done, and then eventually it'll require them, especially like in the creative space. If your gift is gotten refined and it's gotten better and better and better, the world will require you to get bigger. You don't have to worry about that one.
Well, that comes back to where you need it, right? We focus on things like, the size of our audience or the size and scale of a company. Like, that's premature, in terms of what, where you are needed. If you lead with your authentic, true message, with your true purpose, your audience will come to you. It's sort of an if you build it, they will come, or the often misquoted line, most misquoted line of all time. But it's a good one in the misquoted version, because it's true. I mean, if you live that purpose, then it will be fulfilled, and it doesn't matter, if you affect and change one person's life. I mean, to me, that's a life well lived, right? I mean, maybe that's the size of your impact. I don't know. And so, you talk about what your impact is. There's two competing interests here, right? Purpose and impact on this planet, and making money. They're often.
You know what's funny? As you're saying that, I'm just thinking something.
Yeah.
So there was a book called Good to Great by Jim Collins. I don't know if anyone has read that's on here, but it was a book written, probably about 15, 20 years ago, and it basically took companies, right, that led, that were in the S&P, right? So they looked at them like over a 10-year period of time, and they saw the return of the S&P in certain sectors. Mm-hmm. And in one of the sectors, I don't remember exactly which one it was, but the return was about 130% over a 10-year period of time. And then Jim Collins did an analysis, and this kind of speaks to your point of purpose, but he did an analysis and saw other companies that were good to great companies. These were companies that really were operating with, he had certain criteria of what constituted a good to great company, and they were operating at about 330% return over the same period of time over those S&P companies. But there was a book, and most people are familiar with those statistics, but there was another book called Firms of Endearment, and these were companies in the same sector over the same time period that they looked at over that period of time, but they led with their mission and values and purpose. Mm-hmm. They were 1,000% return. So they were almost 10 times more successful than the traditional S&P companies, and they were 3 times more successful than the good to great companies. But to your point, they led with purpose. And a lot of the times, I think we're living in a world that people are leading so much with the money part of it, and they miss that successful people lead with purpose, and they create more value, and that's the reason why they have more financial success. And with the families that we work with, the ones that I've seen that are most successful are the ones that create more value in the marketplace. Like we have a construction company that we work with, and they've just grown tremendously over the last 5 to 10 years. But their whole philosophy is creating more value for their clients. How do they give more value than they get paid for? And of course, they're going to grow quicker than other companies that are looking to get paid as much as possible and give as least value as possible. So I think I think that study is just phenomenal when it comes to purpose. People who lead with purpose and are intentional. I'm not talking about warm and fuzzy stuff. I'm talking about high level business people that lead with purpose are more successful than just people who lead with profit. And now if you think about how do we build that around legacies, those families are going to be even more impactful with their legacies.
Well, and again, bring it back to the goal, right? What can you accomplish? I mean, I love using cryptocurrency as an example, right? People are buying and selling cryptocurrency and making a hand over fist if you're doing it right, right? You're getting in and out and you're able to make a lot of money. So what, right? Money is a tool. If you acquire a lot of money and you don't know what to do with it, you're not going to be happy. In fact, it's going to hurt your well-being, not increase it.
That's what Rockefeller said. Rockefeller said that
Right.
money without direction is a burden.
1,000%. And so, what can you, quick rich schemes, sure, you can get rich quick in terms of you can accumulate a lot of money. Is that your end goal? What is your goal? If your goal is to make money, there's a lot of ways to do that, right? If your goal is happiness and well-being, the path is not money, right? There's a difference. Money is a tool to that end. It's not the end itself. And so it all comes back to, what are you trying to accomplish? Yes, you can get rich quick selling crypto. But if your goal in life is to feel good, to be happy, to have fulfillment, all of these elements, then buying and selling crypto doesn't add anything to that. All it does is produce more of the resource of money, which is a great resource. But you need to know what to do with it. It's a tool. Which direction are you applying it?
Dan, I think you broke up on my end.
Uh-oh, I'm here.
I hear you now. Better.
Okay. Maybe I hope we lost you and not the other way around.
No, Dan, just to chime in, Dan, you're good. You're clear in your voice. I think just Chad's having some difficulties. Just so
Oh,
you know.
okay.
Typical Chad. I'll leave you guys to resolve that later, Danielle. So yes, I mean, so what's interesting is, I think a lot of what we're talking about, right, is that every industry that is pretty much involved in this discussion, the wealth management industry, the estate planning industry, the education to clients, we have to not allow financial assets to be a goal. That we have to convey that this is a tool. There's nothing wrong with making money. Making money is great. It's having more resources, but we have to insist on creating a culture around defining the purpose and the goal. If what we want out of life are people that have more well-being, that are happy, that are fulfilled, if that's our collective end goal, which God, I hope it is. And then the rest, it becomes about, how do you take all of the, it's funny, financial assets in the sense of what you own. Well, from a legacy planning perspective, you have to build who you are, what you create, and your impact, right? Your human capital, your creative capital, and your social capital, who you know. Those three elements have to be built into something that you own, into essentially a financial asset. They have to be transfused into that, because when we die, those things go away, right? We no longer have who we are or any of those elements. And so we need to build it into a lasting legal vehicle of some sort.
Yep. It's just so. I think what we're just trying to portray or come across today on this conversation is how a legacy is not just one-dimensional. It's multi-dimensional. It has financial capital, but it has social capital, it has intellectual capital, it has all these different capitals. And as advisors, I just want to encourage, but also challenge to not be a yes person. I think part of our industries are going through troubles and challenges because a lot of advisors are just becoming yes people to their clients. Yes, okay, we could do that. Yes, we could do that just to get paid. And creating legacies is a lot different than just creating a trust or buying a life insurance policy or an investment. Creating a legacy requires the advisor to get out of their comfort zone. It requires the client to get out of their comfort zone, but it requires, when they come together, something bigger and better. And as an advisor who's been in this space for 20 years, I just want to encourage the advisors that are on this call that if you're doing it great, kudos to you, because there's a tremendous amount of fulfillment in it. And quite frankly, it's also very profitable if you do it well. But if you're not doing it, I want to encourage you just to step out. You know, think about this. If you've been jumping on these legacy conversations, right, and you've been saying, I really want to do it, think about this though for a moment, just where you are right now, and hopefully you're not driving, because I'm going to ask you to close your eyes for a moment. If you are driving, keep your eyes open. but just for a moment, close your eyes. Picture yourself getting into your car at night, turning the car on, putting the headlights on, and picture you not moving because you can't see your whole trip. That's what a lot of people do when it comes to legacy planning. They need to see everything before they start moving. And I just want to share with you that when you start moving and taking that conversation to the client, it doesn't have to be perfect. But as you start moving, you'll start seeing things and you'll start clarifying. And guess what happens? The same thing when you're driving. When you're driving, we only see 300 feet in front of us. And then what happens is, as we're driving, we see another 300 feet and another 300 feet. Well, the great thing about this is you don't need to be perfect. You don't need to have it all in order. Just take that first step with your clients. And guess what's going to happen? You're going to see a little bit more. You're going to be able to navigate a little bit further. And clients will understand that you're taking them on a journey, that you don't necessarily have every answer when it comes to the legacy, but you're willing to get uncomfortable and have these conversations with them. And I just want to encourage you as an advisor, take that step, get in the car, turn the lights on, and hit the gas and start moving.
It's a great point, Chad. You know, I think we've talked about this in the past. I think the biggest mistake that we make collectively as advisors is the desire to present a final solution. That this is your answer. Here it is, all wrapped up with a bow. These are your documents. You know, have a nice day, have a nice life. We're done, right? And you can't do that. You can't do that with legacy. Legacy is a process. It is an evolving, living, breathing organism, and it requires that continual journey that you just highlighted. You don't necessarily know, because look, you don't even know if you're going to complete, right? We don't control when we die. All we can try to do is the best we can while we're alive. And so who knows how far you're going to get on your journey, right? And so that's why it's interesting. Bring it back to social capital. Clients should be our social capital. These are relationships we have. One of the things that has frustrated me in my career, when I worked, for others, is that I saw the tendency for an advisor, whether it was an attorney or somebody, to be treated more like a service provider. And it's like, it's not there. There's an element of things that need to get done, documents that need to get drafted, et cetera. But really, the client should never be telling us what to do. The client doesn't know what to do, even if they think they do. And so we have to create more of an equal footing in terms of this is a relationship. I don't necessarily work for you. I work with you as your advisor. And so that's got to be that sort of needs to be the right foot when it comes to clients in terms of what our relationship is and what our role is. We're here to give advice and guidance, and then to execute and provide some of those services around everything from tax preparation to buying the right insurance policy and then actually investing into the different whatever assets we're investing in, and all, they're pulling the trigger on the plan and the strategy. But it's the plan and the strategy that is 100% what's needed. In fact, I mean, this is sort of the one of the problems everyone has faced collectively is it's the commoditization of the advisory industries, and then the ability for technology to provide those commoditized services, right? At the end of the day, if you're a financial advisor, if it's not already the case, it will very soon be the case that your job isn't to make trades, right? Your job is to advise on the overall, right, what the client's needs and goals and wishes and all of those things are, and how to accomplish that through a strategy, and then a computer can pull the trigger and execute.
Yes.
Right, but as far as I know, and Elon Musk might disagree with me on this, but I don't think computers can fully replace humans when it comes to understanding humanity and human qualities and what people want and need in their life. And so that's our primary role, which comes back to social capital and relationships. It is without a doubt the most necessary, critical, valuable aspect of our life. Interestingly enough, and I kind of say this in the article too, relationships cost nothing. This is the greatest investment you can make that has no out-of-pocket costs. It costs nothing to maintain except for time, right? I mean, there's no reason, and it's interesting because so often we don't develop relationships out of like fear. I think like fear of rejection or something. Like I'm not, Go ahead.
I think there is a cost. It's not a financial cost, but the cost is vulnerability, because the relationships that I've seen that have truly flourished, it's vulnerability that allows that. And I think when we're talking about legacy planning, I think sometimes the advisor's not willing to be vulnerable. And think about this: your clients take the position that you take when it comes to how you approach something. So if you as the advisor are not vulnerable, then they're not going to get vulnerable. But when
Sure.
the advisor becomes vulnerable, one of the things that I love doing, Dan, when I'm working with a family, is I love sharing some of my mess ups and my mishaps, because it gives them freedom then to share theirs. And now we've gotten to truth. We're no longer talking about a facade. We're no longer talking about, how great I am, but we're talking about truth, because it's in our struggles and in our mishaps and in our failures that who we are is created. And when we think that we need to be perfect, well, then we put a facade up that we'll always have to be perfect. And now what happens is we create a barrier for other people, because people can't, when we're perfect, we create a barrier because they can't ever figure out how to be perfect. But when we as the advisors show that we're not perfect, we're giving our best and we're doing our best, we give our clients the ability and the freedom to now say, I don't have to be perfect, he's not perfect, but we're on a journey towards creating an intentional legacy. And I think as advisors, vulnerability is the biggest thing we can bring to the table for our clients, because it gives them freedom for them to be vulnerable. And when they're vulnerable, that gives us the best chance to really help them build and mold and create an intentional legacy. So just want to share that. I think vulnerability is something that is so key, so understated in our world, and is probably one of the most important things of any relationship is vulnerability.
Yeah, I agree. 100%. And that comes back to really honesty, authenticity, truth.
Yep. Yeah.
For sure.
So we have a couple more minutes. So if anyone has a question, you could raise your hand and we'll open up your mic, or you could type it in the chat box and we will ask that question. I'll give another minute or so, and then we'll go from there.
But Chad, while we're waiting on that, cut me off if someone chimes in. One of the things that I've been focused on lately, and it's interesting because I guess COVID has restricted, people being in person with each other and such. But as a culture, right, particularly with digital media, social media, et cetera. Um, the world is more connected than ever, or has the ability to be connected, more connected than ever. But I think that we're failing increasingly to develop those meaningful relationships because they stay facade. And so what I would encourage everyone on this, call is, I make a habit of this, right? So I've got, just take LinkedIn, for example. It's probably 20,000 or something connections. And I make sure, as best I can, I always try to send to a new connection through any form of social media a little hello note. Unless it's just if it's somebody that I'm really connecting with or wanted to connect with. Just a little hello and like, hey, let's have a phone call, or let's have some real personal encounter, because that's where the magic happens, right? That's where the chemistry happens, and suddenly you can form a relationship. And so, if you don't do it, and I've probably met my best clients this way. I've met some incredible people this way. Starting using social media as a means to connect to people you would otherwise not be able to connect to. Don't be afraid of sending those out, right?
Yeah.
So it's a great way to target new contacts, but more importantly, it's really all about the follow-up, because it's just an entry point. And so to turn digital relationships into real social relationships, is a practice that I don't think we do well enough or encourage enough. And that's where you're going to get real value, not just professionally, but personally out of it. You're going to get real satisfaction out of those relatiures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't see any questions or hands raised, but I do want to put a challenge out there. This is me. I love putting a challenge out there. And the challenge I would say is this. Between now and our next one that we have in October, I'd encourage you to choose one client that you work with, one client, and get vulnerable. You don't have to do it every single client, but choose one client that you're going to work with to be intentionally vulnerable and share some of the struggles you've had, how you're working on trying to build this model of legacy into your practice, and just be vulnerable with them. I want to encourage you just to choose one, but observe how you're vulnerable. You being vulnerable opens up them to be vulnerable, and just see how the conversation changes. I just try one. I don't want to ask you to try 1,000 or 500 of them or all of your clients. Just one client that you've worked with, and watch how that, when you're vulnerable, how it changes the dynamics of that relationship. Because I believe clients are looking for advisors that are truthful, have a high level of confidence and competence, and a high level of character. But to have that, you need to be vulnerable. So try it, check it out, see what happens. And if you can, before you hop off of today's legacy conversation, in the chat box, we won't share it with anyone, but could you type in your biggest takeaway from today's conversation with Dan and I? This really helps us tremendously, because it allows us to say, well, yeah, we're really making a difference, and it allows us to, and encourages us to want to come back every month or every other month to do this. So if you don't mind, just your biggest takeaway from today. It could be one sentence. We're not going to share it. We're not going to share it with everyone else, but just what was your takeaway from today's conversation? And then Dan and I will take a look at that when we jump off. So if you don't mind, just go to the chat box, type it in, and then we're going to give a minute or two for you guys to put that in there. And we're going to wrap up for today, and we'll look forward to seeing you in October's the Legacy Project conversation. So just take a minute or two, type it in, so that we can read that. So I'm going to give.
Encourage too, email us. I mean, if you want to have a chat, let's turn it into a real relationship kind of thing. Have a conversation as well.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Danielle, could you put our emails in the chat box, so that if they did want to email Dan or myself, they could do that, and we can really walk this out of showing what it looks like to develop social capital.
Yes. I also just wanted to also share, somebody was on before, but he had to head out for a meeting. But he just said that what we were talking about was really amazing. It was spot on. And he said time is what's invested, which is the most expensive commodity. I just wanted to
That-
share.
That's the reason why we got to be selective with who we invest in. But when we invest, if we're intentional, it'll wind up bearing tremendous fruit for them and for us.
Mhm.
I'll put it in your emails now.
Awesome.
Thank you. Okay,
All right.
so we meet again.
Yep. We're gonna wait for Danielle to put that in the chat box so that if we log off now, then she won't be able to do that. So we're gonna give another minute or so, and then would
Okay.
love to get your biggest takeaway from today if you could put that in the chat. And you could send it individually. It doesn't have to be where everyone sees it too. All right, so Danielle just put in the chat box our email addresses so you can email us.
Oh, Danielle, could you use the Spotlight email? I'm sorry. Just saw that.
Oh, sure. I apologize.
No, no worries.
All right. Well, we thank you for joining us for this month's Legacy Project Conversation. I hope it challenged you. I hope it inspired you. And just remember that you do not need to see the whole trip. You just got to see 300 feet in front of you. You got to put the car on. You got to hit the gas. Start moving. Everything that you want in your model, everything that we want with the clients we work with, are going to be in us moving towards making a difference, building this legacy model. It's not easy. One step at a time. It'll get easier though. God bless you. Enjoyed spending time with you. Until October. We'll see you then. Be well. Bye-bye.